Good evening. How are you tonight? Well, first of all, I'm delighted to see so many women in the audience. And a heads up, the first question needs to be from a woman. So plan what your question is before we get there. It is really a pleasure for me to be here tonight. I am known as a disruptor, provocateur in the industry because everything I've done throughout my career has pushed something in the industry when industry wasn't ready, now being AI. My first book, Provoke, talked about how we need to disrupt and in order to innovate, create cultures of disruption around the world. Disruption made it very uncomfortable for people, so that's kind of what I do. And taking it another level is really around inversion. Whether you're sitting here representing a bank, an insurance company, oil and gas, retail, pharmaceutical, or anything else, your business is being disrupted. It's a matter of you accepting the disruption and moving with it. And that disruption that we're going to talk about is inversion. Our book is called The Inversion Factor. IoT is a big part of it, how to thrive in the IoT economy. And I wrote this book with a dear friend of mine, two dear friends, Professor Sanjay Sarma of MIT, and my dearest friend, Ken Traub, who passed away the night before we completed the manuscript. So this is very much in his memory and honor as well. So where we're at today is the what-if economy, which is very different than the product economy we've had. So think for a minute what happened with Uber. Two guys standing in Paris on a rainy day said, what if I could swoosh on my phone and get a car to appear? That became Uber. Think about Airbnb. Two guys striving to find a sofa to sleep on said, what if every home anywhere in the world opened itself up to anyone anywhere in the world? That became Airbnb. The valuation of Airbnb today collectively is higher than all hotels combined together, yet it has zero asset cost. That happens because of the what-if economy. At the same time that Airbnb was happening, I was with Hyatt and Starwood, encouraging them to think about different models, and they said to me, quote, Linda, nobody's ever going to stay in a stranger's home, right? So when you stop thinking about what if, that's the product mindset, and we're talking about inversion. So inversion is a paradigm in which the business mission is defined by needs first versus products first. Who defines need? All of you. What you like, what your experience needs to be, all of it today is shaping every business to serve you. That is the change in the business that's happening, and that's inversion. So in today's business world, everything is generally pretty fixed, rigid. At the same time that Uber is now delivering every package, FedEx and UPS are still wondering how to operate differently. Amazon is already building drone launching pads, yet people are skeptical about drones, right? So when you have a product mindset, you're very limited. In the inverted business world, you can take many ideas and turn them into many businesses, and we'll talk more about that. So there, you have very little limitations. So if you think about what happened with Apple for a minute, Apple was a computer company that reshaped the music industry, that reshaped the phone industry, that reshapes ... There is no limitation where inversion stops. When you're a product company, you're limited. You begin and end with the definition of your product. And in our book, we talk about all the ways to sort of change that mindset. So for a minute, if you think about Sony TV versus Apple TV, those of you that tried to use that console, impossible. And if you use the Apple TV, it's one button. When you think about Nest and Honeywell, for 50 years, Honeywell was the thermostat in your home, right? Looked pretty ugly, but pretty functional. Most of the time, we'd have to go in to see where the dial is. Why is it that Nest, a startup, took a business that was owned 50 years by another company and redesigned it? Moreover, why are all of these ideas of inversion coming from startups as opposed to companies that are really knowledgeable about the business? So a lot of what I want to do tonight is get you to think, wonder, and ask these questions about your own respective businesses. This is my co-author, Sanjay, trying to fix his unit smoke alarm. This is how I would fix it today with my mobile. Why is it that smoke alarm companies didn't think about that? Because that represents a change to a mindset and a product that they're unwilling to change. So I want you to take about 10 seconds for a minute. Think about whatever respective business you're in. Think about your mindset and wonder if you're rigid or are you willing to think differently about what you can do? And then think about all the businesses that will open up. Amazon, I live in Seattle, about 2 miles away from Amazon headquarters. Amazon started as a book distribution, and now imagine the steps that it has changed. It does anything and everything, and there's no boundary. That's what I believe every business can be. So what we encourage people is to think about, wonder, what is your company's needs-based mindset? Are you at a low score where you're still manufacturing and building things the same way? And by the way, this could be a service company as well. So for instance, insurance companies, if they're still thinking that they're selling premiums to people at a time that in a few years people are not going to own cars, that's a bad business idea, because the entire car business is going to change. So unless you plan ahead, you're not going to have business opportunities. So these are some of the flaws in the product-based mindset. It's very rigid, it's expensive. Normally, I don't even know how the customer is responding to it. You do know that every time that you interact with Amazon when you buy a product, every movement you make on the website is captured. And that's why when you go back, it perfects it, gives you better choices that are closer to what you think. So there's a shift in our economy, in our global economy, going from products to understanding needs to really where the nirvana is, which is experiences. So when you take an Uber, maybe what's really appealing to you is the simplicity, right? You swipe, you never worry, it's charged, you know the rate, you move on. Your experience is what drives Uber. Uber's algorithms change every day based on collecting all the data of human experiences. If Uber was an algorithm, a program that was being shipped every month, it could never satisfy that. So we're getting more into an experience-based economy, where in the past, as a consumer, myself included, I had to wrap myself around what a company gave me, whereas as I move forward, companies are trying to serve me. So all businesses have to realize that they're in a business of serving people, and people's experiences are what drive things. That's what made Airbnb extremely successful, because people have a very pleasurable experience, and that's why they're growing. Now, there is something that's really important in the inversion mindset, and that is a vision. When you're a CEO of a standard company, a traditional company, and you're not changing a lot of things, you don't have to be a visionary, right? Because you have to be very good at selling more and making more money. But when you have to decide on a new business, if I stopped and asked every one of you tonight, what is the new thing your company could do that's diabolically different than what you're doing? You have to be a visionary. You have to think about that. If you're not thinking about that, your company's business is in absolute jeopardy in the very near term. So inversion is not an option. It's something that we all have to worry about as we move on into our careers. Now, if I had a product-centric conversation with somebody, they would say, this is my bestseller product. How can I increase profits? Well, let's call it a new edition and change the price, right? That doesn't do anything for the consumer. If I'm a needs-centric customer, I'll say, this is my bestseller, but people want a great experience. Let's rethink this and introduce a new product. Let's take the risk and make sure that customers are satisfied. Sometimes that means new things have to be developed. And that's very scary to people because it represents risk. And what comes with a new product? Uncertainty around revenue. So any of you here that are in the tech industry, sometimes you really want to change things and develop new things, and you'll hear you can't because you won't generate the revenue. And that stops you. And that's what we need to think about. Now, if you go to the inversion mindset, it's based on experience, it's connected, it's disruptive, it works on any technology. So most of these now will work on an AWS, Amazon server. Any of us today can walk around tonight, develop an application, open it up to the world, we've created a business. That's what today's economy is all about. In the inverted mindset, we leverage assets to create new business. And I want to just talk about curating versus controlling. We're collaborating, we're curating, we're not controlling anymore. You realize that on your mobile phone, you're the master of what goes on that phone. You decide what apps you download. You decide what apps you use. By your use, you're actually changing the algorithms in those apps. So consumers today are curators and collaborators of programs. This is a big shift in the economy that we've had. And of course, now when you start thinking about something like brand, What is the brand of Amazon? The newer, more aggressive companies that are inversion-based don't thrive on brand. In fact, as you'll see in a minute, brands are dying. What they thrive on is making sure that they meet experiences. So if I ask you what is Amazon, you'll come up with 30 different things. What is the definition of Amazon? Does it matter anymore? So the theoretical question is, do brands matter anymore? And brands can actually kill our business. And the millennials actually are very brand comfortable if there is no brand. They'll utilize the technology. So something for you to think about in terms of brand. So we as consumers have gone from consumers of technology to curators of technology to co-creation and co-innovation of technologies. That's what the sharing economy is, the app economy is. And so in our book, and at this part, I will just go through a little bit faster, just in the interest of time. But in order to talk about inversion, we had to actually create a new vocabulary. Because in the world, as you see in IoT, we moved into devices, intelligent devices, and IoT is highly related to this. Your homes today have probably your alarm connected to your fire system, connected to your kitchen stuff, connected to your Echo, connected to your mobile, connected to your car. All of these are IoT devices that are connected. We're entering a hyper-connected world. Now, all of us are at different levels of that, but everything is starting to get connected. So when we were designing our book and thinking about architecture, we realized that there are 4 components of connectedness, composability, recruitment, and immersion, all of which is described each at a chapter in the book, that are new paradigms, because the new world is going to be very, very different than the world that we've had. So IoT plays a big role in it. So we started our world with things, right? I'll use a very simple example. An oven. An oven initially came to a household several years ago, maybe 30 years ago, as an oven. It had a function called an oven. The next thing that happened, oven got a sensor and an actuator. So you could program it, right? And it would do certain things. So people became comfortable that I can program my oven turns on at a certain time at a certain temperature. The next thing that happened is that that oven became intelligent. Because now my expectation is when I put a certain food in the oven, the barcode of the food is talking to the oven, which turns the oven on at the appropriate temperature for the appropriate amount of time. That's called intelligence of things. So we're now moving into that paradigm. On top of which, now in my kitchen, I have maybe Echo and Alexa or Google at home, and I'm talking to them and I'm saying, Alexa, turn on my oven to 350, or Alexa, cook my pork. And I'm expecting that it's going to know what temperature the oven is going to be. That's called the intelligence of things. And ultimately, we're entering a world where devices become experiences and everything is going to become interconnected. As we enter into the world of drones, driverless cars, where it's no longer going to be possible for a human to address it, because the number of connections are going to be many. When your driverless autonomous car has to talk to the city regulation with the lights, right? With the parking structure, think about the number of interconnections. So to do this, we need artificial intelligence. And we're going from a product mindset to a needs mindset. There's a rapid shift happening. And of course, we're getting into a world where AI is going to be needed because there's going to be billions and billions of things that have to interconnect with each other. And that is the world that we're entering. So how do we do that? There comes our AI. So I inserted this section for our conversation because if nothing else, I want to remove a little bit of the myth about AI tonight, right? Because artificial intelligence, by definition, is when you get a machine to think like a human. It's the standard definition, right? And however, there's a real sort of purpose and intent, which is equally very important for me and others, which is the ethical and moral boundaries of AI. Where should it begin? Where should it end? What are the boundaries? And we can talk about this a little bit later as well, including security and other things. So AI isn't new. In fact, a notable British mathematician said, what was the Turing test? 60-some years ago, right? It is when a machine can think like a human. So why has it taken 68 years for us to get excited about AI when it's nothing new? It's because suddenly there's a real need for AI. And that's called the rebirth. Some of them call about AI going into the sort of the deep sleep and it's now awake. It's because now we have a lot of data, and we need to analyze this data in order to do our business, right? So today, gaming platforms that provide gaming, it's unbelievable to me, but have 1 million individual users per day. They handle 1 billion pieces of distinct data per day, right? So start thinking in that dimension. So suddenly I had a need. That's why AI came. It's not magical. And we're still trying to figure out, in fact, we're not even close to being able to do the Turing test. That's how far away we are. So we started AI at the very core. Then there's the more advanced generalized AI. There's super intelligence. And the quick tutorial is, this one at the standard AI is when I sort of have some abilities as highly programmatic. Those of you that know about Watson or know about the systems that have algorithmic thing, that's where we are at the standard AI. Generalized AI is when there's more complexity that the system can handle. And the only example of that we've had from DeepMind is AlphaGo, which is a complex system, right? So we're barely trying to scratch the generalized AI scenario. And then comes superintelligence, where now the machine is creative. We're nowhere close to that, but somehow we're all sort of, even though we're stuck at the very beginning, there's a lot of hype in media. Two people that I highly respect seem to be on this bend, now joined by Elon Musk, that machines are going to take over. So the point of the tutorial, everyone, is that we're not even close to here. We're barely here. There's really no worry about here. So that's sort of the point of the tutorial. And Hollywood is responsible for that. So think about, have you seen a positive movie about machines doing any good? It's always the cyborgs destroying us, right? I want to see a good cyborg come up once in a while. So that's kind of where I want to bring this reality. In the real world, we're just at the beginning stages. We're beginning to understand how to do this properly. So 60-some years ago, 60 years later, we're still trying to figure it out. So I just suggest that we take the rhetoric and all the criticism, that's a lot of the time is just personal opinion, take that in stride and sort of think about that carefully. So as I think about artificial intelligence, I've begun separating it out between artificial and intelligence. We're doing a lot of hyperintelligence right now. We haven't yet succeeded bringing artificial in fully where it needs to be. So the question is this intelligence versus artificial intelligence? Chatham House is the perfect environment to throw a question like that and ask each of you to sort of think through this and say, are we really at the point of artificial intelligence? We are, however, at a point of hyper-connectedness where households are now getting not just an Alexa, they're getting a Google at home, they're getting an Amazon TV. By the way, everybody, you do know that when these devices are turned on, they never turn off. They capture everything, right? That you're saying or thought you were saying, and all of that is being captured and understood and studied. Not deviously, but it's just the function, right? So all of that are things that we need to worry about. And then earlier on, I said that we have some social and moral responsibilities. We need to think about AI for good, and that's very important. What are the good things that we can use AI for? We have famine, hunger, we have diseases, we have overpopulation, we have shortage of water. Being able to understand and work with that data is one of the biggest benefits of AI worldwide. But also we have responsibility to think about ethics. Where are the boundaries? Where do we stop pushing things? What is the impact of AI and workforce, right? The 6 factors that I've come up with that really impact AI in enterprises. Number 1, and enterprises are big companies, lots of data. Compute availability is now very cheap, right? You can rent whatever at any speed. We can narrow down the focus of AI. We want to do things fast. We want to become competitive and non-obsolete. And we also have a culture of agility. We want to constantly change what we're doing. But there is an interplay between human and machine. And the question is, are humans augmenting machines? Are machines augmenting humans? What does augmentation mean? And these are the moral and ethical questions that we're constantly looking at and trying to understand. So I joined Element AI, a startup from Montreal, because Element looks at uniquely, while we're very focused on products and services, we have probably the largest applied research group within our company, as well as fundamental researchers, both within our company, associated with universities, with MIT, moving on to Oxford, to Cambridge, University of Tokyo, as we expanded, because artificial intelligence doesn't come in a box. The biggest thing with AI is we still need to understand what questions to ask and how to solve what we want to solve. So if any of you think that this comes in a package or a program, we're nowhere close to that in our thinking. And so at Element, we look at research. We have a branch that's focused on AI for good, working on things like looking at displacements in Darfur, in Sudan, looking at food supplies, right? While at the same time, we're working to transform companies, but our model is non-predatory. The biggest thing that has happened to AI, which is highly negative, is in the insurgence of companies wanting AI experts, universities have lost resources. What happens if every university loses their best people in AI? Who's going to train the next generation? By creating a non-predatory, democratized model, we're trying to push academics to have more availability, fund them more so that we can have more research. And that's why really I'm there, because philosophically we're synchronized. And just really briefly in the book, one chapter talks about all the steps, the roadmap that you have to go through for inversion. And then I want to sort of finish up with the thought that when you're thinking about inversion, there are three things that interplay together. The first one is innovation. So in whatever your business you're in, and if you're sitting there and saying this doesn't apply to me, that's the one that I think you are the ones that should really think about that. So number one is innovation. What is new in my business that I can do? The second piece is, what is the technology that I need to get there? But perhaps the third and most important element is the culture, right? What is the necessary culture that's going to enable me to get there? When we think of an Uber, an Amazon, an Airbnb, these companies grew up with the culture of inversion. They're not going to the culture of inversion. So, but we have thousands of traditional mega companies, giant banks, oil and gas, retail, which is going to be massively displaced by Amazon, that has to figure out, how do I go do this? So the culture, the mindset has to change. All of them coming together, pushing to bring inversion. So the inversion factor talks about the fact that, yes, innovation and technology are important, but equally important is culture. This is an example of some companies that are doing inversion really well. Many of them are organically such companies. But one of the things to think about is, why did Uber succeed when all of the car companies could have been the Uber, right? So, and the solution is not to go out there and buy a startup. That doesn't change a culture. That just means you just acquired a company. So there's a difference in that. Culture is the new brand. Brands are going away. People, the new generation is creating that. And I just want to leave you with the thought that inversion is a must, is not an option. And with that, I'd like to invite you to have conversations with us. And it's been an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. Thank you. So we're going to move into questions, if you can think about your questions. And the first question is from a woman. Yes. No, you're not. Put your hand down. Okay. Okay.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm a postgraduate at the London School of Economics. And you mentioned that there's a lot of negative rhetoric about AI, and that's very true. And at the same time, at another part of your presentation, you mentioned that along with all of the good, there are some tough questions that we will be needing to ask about the workforce, but also maybe about how the direction of AI will go, maybe in a way we don't expect. So how do we think of AI in a positive way? How do we sort of marry those two things together and move forward and be productive about it, despite our concerns that I think have a valid basis?
Right. So that's a very good question, and my only answer is mindfulness. In all of this, we have to be very mindful. So big companies right now, for instance, are beginning to anticipate the workforce displacement they're going to have and think about training programs. What do they do? If we are successful in just trucking alone, as Tesla now has released the picture, I think, of the driverless van, and yet has orders for it, which is pretty stunning. We have to think about the hundreds of thousands of jobs and use this time mindfully to retrain the workforce. And that happens at 3 levels. At an individual mindfulness, everybody is responsible to think about this. This doesn't come from another universe. Second, companies are responsible. So at least in the US, they are gathering with economists, with psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists. What is our society going to become? To understand how to do that. Thirdly, at a government level, which I think Europe is far ahead than the US, to think about the consequences and bring all of them together. And finally, we need to think about education. What is education going to be in the new world? So those are the considerations. Thank you. Yes, now you're on.
Uygar Kılıç, I'm a member and freelance marketing consultant. One of my clients is in IoT, smart building technology. So my question is, when the IoT develops, will it be the second internet? Because when you connect all devices, such as cars are staying stationary 90% of the time, they can be a Wi-Fi hotspot or cloud storage. A smart fridge has more computing power than it needs. So we can use it, we can connect all smart fridges as a supercomputer. So after all these stages, the IoT, like 15 years later, it will be the second internet? Is it going to be something like that?
So the question is about the sort of when truly things move around, because remember, your car in the truly hyper-connected, intelligent world could actually be a car you license out for mobility to somebody else, except it's driving itself. So for the 6 hours that's sitting in the parking lot, it's actually driving, someone around. Can we do that? Yes. I don't know which generation it is. I think we're definitely in the third digital revolution. The fourth one that's coming up, I'm calling it a human revolution, because it's the first time that humans have to seriously think about the boundaries of where are things going. We've been very spoiled and trained to have technology delivered to us, and we're happy to use it. Now we have to think about how to use it. Can IoT get there? Absolutely. The technologies will be there. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thanks very much. Miriam Howe. I'm quite interested in, so you had a slide that showed almost a continuum that went from the Internet of Things, intelligence and things, immersion. And I'm quite interested in the difference between intelligence and autonomy. So a lot of the devices on the Internet of Things, they're smart, they're not intelligent. Mm-hmm. And you can have intelligence without being autonomous, without mm-hmm. taking any human out of the loop. And you can have systems that aren't intelligent, that can be autonomous, mm-hmm. that are just pre-programmed. So I'm interested in your view on this and whether that's actually helpful to keep those things separate, particularly when thinking about the security and the sort of the scary side of mm-hmm. the interconnectedness.
So the question has to do with smart, because devices have become smart, and that's a very good point. That doesn't mean they're intelligent. Intelligence implies the right thing connects with the right thing for the right purpose. So do I see dangers in autonomous, meaning when things start functioning on their own? Not necessarily. If you take autonomous cars, statistics show that actually there'll be a dramatic drop in accidents. There are a lot of positives in terms of mobility, less cars, etc. But there's always the danger. But you are right. Smart does not imply intelligence, and intelligence is different than autonomous. And those are 3 different dimensions. And I'm happy to discuss it with you more. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Kendi. I work for IBM.
Yay!
So I had a question about the IoT, and so I work with a lot of clients who are they want to embrace the IoT, they get the sensors part, they get all excited about that, but then when they realize those sensors are giving them a lot of data, they go, oh my God, because they already have a lot of data and they are not doing much with it, so they kind of get stuck at that point. So my question was, are you experiencing that, and how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a concern that while devices became smart and possibly intelligent, IoT took off to the point of devices being connected and intelligent, but it hasn't really changed much, right? It has changed in some respects where the consumer has been involved, because consumers are actually curating their connections. Consumers are architecting, what do I want to connect? I want to bring down my shades, turn on my oven, turn on my security. But if you really go back to the companies, they've had a really hard time, Sylvia, capitalizing on IoT. And there's a big concern that IoT has not generated the revenue. I think it's because we haven't yet thought about the AI component of it. to deliver value from it. So it's very difficult to deliver value. When we get into the immersion of things, I just want to point out that we've been very avant-garde in the book. We believe that devices are going to intelligently recruit other devices because there are going to be so many devices that a human can't architect that connection. So true immersion is when a device wakes up and says, in order for me to function, I need to recruit 10 different devices around me. It could be going back to excess capacity of a unit next to me to try to do that. But you're going to see, and it's not to be scared, but yes, cars are going to be talking to each other. And things are going to happen because it's possible there's a car closer to the destination to do something. But it's been difficult to capitalize on that. That's true. Yes, hang on, right over there.
Charles Vivian, you showed a very interesting slide about a human head and also an artificial head, and who is educating who. In the Internet of Things as it moves on, what will the role of the human head be? Will it become less and less, or will it still have an ability to influence the developments of the things?
So that's a very important question, right? And the credit for the graphics goes to lovely Nick there, because I woke up this morning and said, I need this for our discussion, can you help? But it's about augmenting the other, and it's a philosophical question, right? So we're still going to need humans to design things, and machines are not replacing humans, they're augmenting, but the definition of augmentation is one of the ones that human beings should be involved in defining. So we can't be passive in that process. Certain things, distribution centers, for instance, can be completely automated. It's difficult to say humans augment that. But that's just one instance. When you get into medicine, law, the service industry, hospitality, right? I don't know if you've been in the hotels that are experimenting with a robot bringing you the toothbrush at midnight. And one of the problems is that the robot can't, so it hits the door because it can't reach to ring the bell or do anything. So suddenly you have that, and then you open the door and there's the robot, and it doesn't open up, the toothbrush doesn't pop out. And we're not there yet, right? On the other hand, as my plane was stuck at the ramp, because the operator was unable to bring the ramp to the plane. And as a result, we couldn't get out of the plane for 1 hour. I started thinking, well, that's maybe an opportunity for automation. If we can put something on another planet, can we not possibly bring that sky bridge out? It's just the thought. So it's just about where intelligent augmentation is. Any of you frustrated on planes have probably thought about that. For instance, why am I sitting here when there are 10 open gates and I still can't get to my gate? But okay. All right, next question. Yes?
My question.
Oh, Mike has come.
Konstantin Wangenheimer, also of the LSE. My question surrounds security vulnerabilities. There's a lot of existential conjecture surrounding AI. My question is more sort of what actually has tangible effects on a business's bottom line is a lot of things, be it baby monitors or industrial control systems, are very like internet-facing, vulnerable. What kind of sort of regulation is coming into place? What kind of conversations are we having surrounding that subject? It's obviously, I think, a big topic.
So one of the interesting nuances of the inverted companies and products or things that are coming out, regulations follow instead of regulations thought in advance. So if you think about Uber, Uber is facing regulations 4 or 5 years into the business that arguably should have been addressed earlier. Security concerns that should have been addressed earlier. Airbnb is facing basic taxation issues years after being in business. So one of the things that we're seeing in the new economy is that we're not addressing these things, whether it's security, whether it's other considerations, and we're being more experimental because maybe as humans we like the advantage that it offers to us. I don't know how many of you realize that when you sit in an Uber car, it is not the driver that's responsible or Uber for the insurance, it's you. If there is an accident, you're responsible. Now, a lot of eyebrows are going up because if you didn't know that, that's what happens. So convenience and human comfort is driving an economy that I encourage everybody to think about what those consequences are. Going back to the point that we're equal players in today's economy, not just the consumers of that. But we're not thinking through everything yet. Yep. Okay, yep.
In terms of timings and consequences.
I'm sorry, singularity in terms of?
Singularity in terms of, Masa's son talks about it, and the implications on humankind and how one would deal with that.
Well, I don't think I have the answer with that because singularity is a concept, right? And I think it's promoted by some individuals. It's not necessarily a doctrine, but it talks about the world where everything merges into one. And I think it would be conjecture. I'm happy to blow some ideas with you later on, but not one that I could say there's an exact answer. But it's a topic that a few people believe in. Yeah. Next.
David Glass, how does the Internet of Things interact with climate change and sustainability and those sorts of issues? Is it a friend or a foe?
Theoretically, it should be an unbelievable asset. IoT used in understanding sort of climate nuances and the impact of the climate nuances on things is dramatic. Is it used completely? Not quite. Is it a foe? I can't see how it would be a foe, because IoT is just connections that bring a lot of knowledge and information applied correctly. So I think it could be a tremendous asset if it's not quite there yet, but I don't see that it could be an enemy. Yes?
Amir Ahmed, I'm a fund manager. My question is more regarding some of the companies that have been successful so far in the space and how much data they've already managed to gather. Do you think that there's an element of monopolistic behavior, and whether the advantage that they have on the amount of data that they've gathered is going to be a hindrance for new startups in terms of the amount of AI information they have and the amount of data they've already seemed to analyze and potentially could analyze down the road?
Okay. So this question relates to the concept that we need data sets because we're training algorithms. The larger the data set, the stronger the algorithm, the higher the level of accuracy. So without a doubt, certain companies, maybe Amazon one of them, that collects astronomical amount of data can train its systems much more efficiently and can play in that. But AI is also a lot around the concept of what we're building. It's not just about having the data, which works for Amazon. But if you take the larger enterprises looking for solutions, there still is a very big greenfield for startups to come in to figure out how to help enterprises. But data is definitely there. Now, is it monopolistic? I think it's just natural. It's a consequence. Why Amazon has so much data is because we choose to use it a lot, because we like the convenience of swiping when we're watching a game instead of going to a store, or we go to the store to get the price to then order it on Amazon. So we're providing all the data. They're getting massive. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I'm at Element in Montreal, to try to create the next competitor to that. But I think that there is a play for smaller companies. AI is a very complex matter that we need to look through. Yeah. Yes, back.
Vincent Champion, journalist and Chatham House member. It's very fascinating. Right at the beginning, you talked about transition from product to need. In the business areas I write about, there's this debate's been going on for some time, independently or in conjunction with consideration about topics like AI and the IoT. But one of the things that comes up is that actually if you transfer the interpretation of your needs to your supplier, i.e. if you're the consumer... I'm sorry,
transferring needs to...
If you say to your supplier, okay, don't have a product focus, I'm simplifying it, don't have a product focus, just satisfy my needs, you're actually transferring your power to him. So actually, in a way, the consumer isn't gaining power, he's losing power, because he's putting all his eggs in one supplier's basket. So in terms of performance outputs and so on.
Sort of like Facebook.
Well, if you say so, but
No, because that's what's
I've
happening.
got something very different in mind.
Yeah.
But actually you're actually conceding power to the person who's supplying you with all your needs. That's one of the elements of the debate.
Yes.
It's a real debate.
And the question is?
Well, it's a comment, really. I mean,
Okay.
Okay, fair enough. But
Love the comment. So thank you for that. And I would just say that by buying a product, you're already saying that you've transferred that knowledge. Because when you go to buy a car and you buy a particular car and you provide all your information, the car dealer knows what car you had before, what you're buying. There's a lot of transfer of information that is happening. I don't know, and it's a very good question. I don't think that there's a way to avoid sharing needs. I think if we begin to block that, we're not necessarily going to succeed in building a better economy, because the economy is shifting. A few big players are going to shift, and if the rest of the companies don't get there, this will be a true monopoly of just a few players. Any other? Yes.
Hi, Nick Blackwell, Emma Wolf International. I just wondered if you might be able to comment on where you feel China is currently in this new kind of race versus the North America.
I would say that probably the most aggressive investor in AI is China. The largest investments in AI, in robotics, in intelligence robotics, if you look at what's happening, the biggest funds coming in from China, both in terms of investing, learning, starting companies within China, I think at a different stratosphere than the US or North America in general, or Europe. And we've had cases where for the first time in Germany, KUKA ended up being sold to a Chinese company, except it's a German company which fortunately kept 85% and didn't give everything away. But yes, that's a very important question and something we should be very mindful about. Yeah. Yes?
Catherine Hillman, King's College London. Connected to that question, China has been investing into the social credit system. Do you see any other sort of ways in which businesses might try to use social networks between people?
In what way? Can you clarify?
I mean, the social credit system basically tries to use existing social networks to evaluate, amongst other factors, your credit, like how likely that banks are to give you credit, right? So do you see any other, like in the future, do you think there's going to be other ways in which companies are going to try to use existing social networks to generate new revenue?
I don't know if I have an answer for that, but it just sparks in my mind that in the US, at least, we now have a problem because 2 of our credit agencies, including Equifax, are now so infiltrated that we even don't have anything to check our credit. But no comment on that. Thank you. Any other? Yeah?
Alex Torre, the Law Society. My question is about data and data protection and the control that we have over data. How do you see artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things balancing the rights of people in terms of the control of their data and the right to be forgotten, for example, or to require that certain aspects of your life are no longer recorded by a certain device, for example?
Right. So this is a very important thing. Mathematically, the number of connections, as the number of connections increase, naturally the intrusion points increase, right? And on the other hand, we are becoming very, very good at that in IoT. If any of you have looked at things to architectures like blockchain, and you're wondering, why is this thing becoming so prevalent? It's because something like blockchain offers an architecture for us to deploy IoT in a way that addresses a lot of these considerations. Not everything in cyber has been addressed. Going back to your first question of data and data protection, I think that's a very big concern of mine because I see us being very weird as a society. On the one hand, we put everything we have on Facebook. We tell everything about us to everybody. Then we're worried about data intrusion. So I'm kind of confused. If you look at what's happening with natural language processing systems like Echo and Google, the extent of private questions that are being asked on a system that's recording is off the charts, right? Yet at the same time, we're worried about data privacy. So I'm confused. I am wondering that philosophically as a society, which one matters to us, right? Is it truly security, in which case the first thing we do is come in and turn off, yet it's on all the time. And at the same time, I'm also talking to Siri on my phone. You realize all of these go to different companies, right? All of this is going into data that's being collected. So what data security becomes, I think, is a very interesting question as we move into the future. Yes?
Hi, I'm Stephen Cooney, and I'm retired now, but I was, for many years, I worked with, in the U.S. for Siemens, which is probably your iconic product-driven company.
Yep.
I guess I have 2 points. The first one, and the major point, is that for many years, Siemens has been trying to sell this kind of integrated service, information-driven service, to municipalities, regional governments, and so on. And the problem that we have had there is basically consumer resistance, in the sense of if your consumer is a government and they have to spend the money, and then you have to politically sell that, that's an issue. And how do you deal with that when you're moving, you're moving rapidly ahead with AI in one respect, but on the other hand, you can't even get municipalities to coordinate their traffic lights.
But Siemens also has been a giant in manufacturing things for households. So sometimes it depends how you look at the problem, because you might not succeed on the government front, but there are many things that I think Siemens a long time ago could have owned in the IoT space, right?
Actually...
and the resistance is, just to wrap up this question, the resistance is as much within Siemens as it is outside.
Well, that's probably true, but
Right.
let me just finish on that. Just first of all, to correct the information a little bit, Siemens doesn't make household goods anymore. If you buy a Siemens oven, for example, it was actually co-manufactured with Bosch. And Siemens sold that business to Bosch. And of all the businesses we had, that was about the smallest.
And equally, Bosch could have owned that space.
Oh, yeah, well, that's right. They're out of it, too.
Yeah.
But the other point is, the other comment I had was you listed a group of companies, and you included GE and Ford.
Yes.
GE is currently a disaster.
It is. The reference to
and
GE.
Ford is...
the reference to GE is because of Predix, the platform. So GE actually was the first company to introduce a commonly available platform for IoT called Predix, which actually attempts to do it. GE as a company may be in trouble, but it was actually one of the companies that went there, and Ford Mobility is one of the companies that really pushed on some of the aspects. That's
yeah, so why are they behind GM now in the mobility? That's the knock on Ford, which is that GM.
So let's take that to the cocktail hour. Good point.
Okay.
Go ahead, back there. Okay. Go ahead.
Patricia Rochford, consultant. You talked about education. How do we educate people from university back down and, for example, teach children, like a 3-year-old, not to ask Echo which dress they should wear? So we're teaching values as well as how to cope with this.
Right,
future.
and that's a very good point. So on education, one of the problems with online education is when you're taking a module, just before I get back to your question, is you sit there and there's no knowledge of you as an individual, right? You might not even understand precisely the module, but you answer a question, you go to the next module. So to improve education by putting things like image recognition, body temperature sensors, ways that the system can understand is a child understanding. And by the way, a lot of this is being driven by China. China is not going to have enough teachers for the students. So they're pushing the envelope on humanoid robots, on online education, on learning methods to truly understand the student. Once we can begin to perfect those and make them available at a lower cost, we can really reach education broadly into places that won't have an opportunity to have a computer or an iPad to get there. But just having the same material that you would learn in a class digitally available doesn't mean we're educating. It just means we're digitally distributing the same material. We need to do better. Okay, other? Yes.
James Castle from Statoil. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on how you see the Internet of Things having an effect on the global demand for power going forward.
Done right, the whole idea of IoT is to be able to consume things and be more rational in consumption. But there's a big undertone to that, which means done right, right? So consumption of energy can be highly reduced if I can see what's available around me, use what's there. I mean, in each of our households, you do know that we waste tremendous amount of energy. All those hanging plugs when we leave, those wires that we have in every room, we're wasting energy. There are easy ways in IoT that we can do that. Unfortunately, because we haven't commercialized them and haven't found out what the economy of it is, it hasn't become something, but it's one of the key ways that we can use IoT. Very good question. Yes?
Hi, I'm Kirsten Horton from King's College London. I've been reading a lot about concerns that businesses using artificial intelligence and telling their artificial intelligence to optimize for profit might end up discriminating on things like gender or ethnicity and not even knowing it because their AI is a bit of a black box.
Sure.
So are you concerned about this, or how would you potentially address this or ask the government to address it?
The actual number of these incidents in proportion to the number of times that those incidents don't happen is so minuscule, yet it's a grabby attention thing because we're very sensitive about key things like discrimination. So I think, will errors happen? Any system that has learned has taken a while, right? So I think that we will have errors. We have to be mindful about them. The nice thing is these are highly documented. So any company, whether it's Uber or Google or any of them that have done this inadvertently, it's all documented and ways that it has to be addressed. So I'm not necessarily concerned that it's going to lead in the wrong direction because it is computer algorithm and it is going to make mistakes. We just have to be mindful. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. And I'd like to close it on someone making a positive note about AI. So go ahead.
No pressure.
No pressure.
George Batchelor from Edge Health. I had a question about blockchain as an enabler for the Internet of Things and whether things like Bitcoin are value adding or whether they're somehow a bit of a bubble and also using up a huge amount of energy to do the mining.
So you're talking about two different things. Blockchain as an architecture and a model, Bitcoin as a currency going from $900 to $10,000 in 6 months. Beats me. I have one Bitcoin. So, and I'm because of that, I'm super happy. I'm one. But blockchain is really a way for us to be able to address the complexity of the architecture. And the brief thing about blockchain is that it traces everything down. And that's going to be important because when you have millions of things connecting to millions of things, you need an architecture to support it. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is a currency. The jury is out. It started in a very obscure way. The reason Bitcoin started, as all of you know, is pornography. Because it was a way to be able to do things without logging them. No, but it became an interesting one, right? Because there is a ledger. And in Bitcoin, from the very beginning, there's a ledger. Unlike a bank that you will never see the ledger, Bitcoin ledgers are available, and it traces back to the origin of money. And actually, agents that are called agents in the system have to work together to address it. So it actually brings quite a bit of transparency. In the last 2 to 3 years that Bitcoin has become a hype and has gotten so much valuation, we haven't yet seen it move into the industry. Some places use it, but I yet don't know a hotel I can check in or an airline ticket I can buy using my Bitcoin, right? And the currency fluctuation is very high. It's radical, which is very different than standard currency fluctuations. So there are a lot of questions with it, but it's very interesting to watch. It does, however, show a change. And if somebody's here from a financial institution, Bitcoin in some way represents potentially, will we need banks once we have Bitcoins, or do we need Bitcoin management companies? Will we ever need a bank? Thank you very much. Thank you.